Hey guys, and a very warm welcome back to my channel. So now let us take our discussion further, and the next topic that I would like to discuss is the Gujral Doctrine. Okay, so this is the video lecture series session 3 of the UPSC preparation for prelims and mains. It is a wide in-depth discussion. The amount of discussion would be equal to what is expected from you to write in your UPSC mains and for your prelims knowledge. So I know that I told you that the series would be quite regular, but there was certain emergency and I was not able to create videos, but now I will try to make them run them smoothly regularly. So now let us come back to the next topic, okay, which we are going to discuss today. The topic of discussion is Gujral Doctrine. Okay, so Gujral Doctrine was a policy that basically it is a kind of a doctrine and a philosophy which changed the dynamics of our foreign policy dramatically. Okay, so this particular doctrine was introduced by foreign minister in 1998 who was I.K. Gujral. Okay, he introduced this policy, this doctrine, and what was this doctrine all about and how did it changed the foreign policy dynamics? Now we are going to discuss. So first of all, let us know that why in the first place this doctrine was introduced. Okay, so when I.K. Gujral he became the foreign minister, he observed that our nation with our neighboring countries, especially the smaller neighboring countries, were not very good. They were sour and they were creating lots and lots of troubles for India. Okay, like our small nations like Nepal, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar and all, and the relations were not good with them. Okay, so all of these not so good relations were basically posing some kind of restrictions and some kind of troubles for India and our foreign policies. So Gujral introduced this doctrine, okay, especially for the smaller neighboring countries to improve relations of India with them. So the policy was basically, the doctrine was basically the one where we will be giving up certain concessions or certain aids which are not going to be conditional. Okay, like if you are doing something for the people, for the smaller nations around us, okay, so if we are providing them with any kind of aid or any kind of support in any case, then we are not going to expect them to return us with that favor. Okay, because of course India is a developed and it is a more developed country and a big large country with a good economy. Okay, so we actually, if we are providing them with the aid and we are expecting that same thing from them, so it would be difficult for the smaller nation to compare up to the aid that we have given. Okay, so it would be very difficult for them to return that favor back to India. Okay, so this policy, in order to improve the relation with the smaller nations around us, what this policy aimed at was that India would give basically the concessions to the neighboring countries, and in return they would not expect anything, and the concessions would be basically and purely on the favor, on the good faith, and not on something like I want reciprocity is not needed in this case. Okay, so this was what was the basic idea of the Gujral Doctrine. Okay, so this offer, actually after the implementation of this doctrine, it altered the dynamics of South Asian countries, our relation with the smaller nations. Okay, how did it change the dynamics? Now let us look at that part. So earlier what happened was that China and Pakistan used to have a ill will towards India. Okay, they usually exploited their dissatisfaction, but now after the Gujral Doctrine they couldn't complain about it, and even they started favoring India. So it was a kind of a change in dynamics. Also in 2018, if you say those policies of Gujral Doctrine even continue till now. If you want to have another example, 2018 one I'm going to take afterwards. Now let us move systematically. Okay, now after some time after the implementation of Gujarat Doctrine, we actually, the Bangladesh, small neighbors like Bangladesh and Maldives, etc., they used to, complain about the big brother attitude of India. Big brother here means that we are just, dominating them. So that kind of attitude was often criticized by them. But after the Gujarat Doctrine, India has changed. India has actually got a makeover of their image, and India was able to build trust with them, and they started supporting India. All of that criticism that used to be there vanished. Okay, and Pakistan, what happened with Pakistan, that due to our like good wills and doing things with the good faith without expecting any kind of reciprocity, this actually led Pakistan to be isolated. Okay, isolated from other, for impacting any kind of influence, or it actually got isolated from the other Southeast Asian countries, and there was a better relationship and better faith and trust between the other smaller nations and India. Okay, now in 2004 to 2014, during the time of Congress, when Congress was in the center, Manmohan Singh, further he extended this doctrine. He didn't just left it. Okay, he continued to practice that, and he extended some of the bit of supporting factors to India, but from India. But in return, he actually just starting to expect a bit of reciprocity. Okay, so it was not completely in the good faith, but it was expected from the other countries to actually even return a little bit and do some kind of favor for us also. Like if we are providing some kind of aid to them, so they should do some bits of favors for us also. Okay, all those troubled areas should be resolved, and they should not complain and all. So it was expected from them, and a small bit of reciprocity was starting to creep in, and that expectation started to creep in. But after 2014, when PM Modi came to power, his party, he changed the name of Gujarat Doctrine into Neighborhood First Policy. Okay, so you have to note this thing, that the name has been now changed to Neighborhood First Policy, but the basic idea or philosophy is the same. You have to know this name because sometimes it could be asked in the form of Neighborhood First Policy. Okay, in the question, as a question. So in then you should know that we are talking about the Gujarat Doctrine here. Okay, so but even after changing the name, there was not much that was achieved using this philosophy, and not much was, there was the stagnation in the relationships, and there was no basic kind of advancement anywhere. Now you have been, I don't know if you know this or not, and if you don't know, I would recommend you to just pause this video and just search the Google about this thing. There was an incident, okay, which is known as economic blockade. There are actually 3 blockades that has happened in Nepal. Okay, and these economic blockades, the recent one was because of the Madheshi protest. Okay, there are Madheshis and Paharis, 2 type of people, 2 communities, you can say, 2 Nepali communities that live in Nepal. In the hilly regions, Pahari Nepalis live, and in the plains region, Madheshi Nepalis live. Okay, so there was a protest and a kind of a civil, a protest between Paharis and the Madheshis, because Paharis were usually elites, and they were there in the, at the higher positions in the in the Council of Ministers and all, for taking decisions and etc. So there were always Paharis who are taking decision, and Madheshis were not given any kind of any kind of attention to their problems, and Paharis were the elites, and they used to do all these decision taking part, and Madheshis were not taken into consideration. They were basically treated as second class. So there was a protest which happened, Madheshi people protested, okay, and that India supported those Madheshi Nepalis. Okay, now I would like to tell you one thing, that these Madheshis were basically PIOs of India. okay, people of Indian origin, but it has been a long time since this has happened, and now they are a part of Nepal, and they are basically Nepalese people. And India should not have directly, just started to support Madeshi's protest. It was like against, if India is going to provoke, not even provoke, but even support the protests in its neighboring countries, so it is basically going to affect India as well. Okay, there would be a harsh impact on India as well, because we are connected to our neighbors. Any disturbance in the neighboring countries would be a effect on India as well. And India being a big nation, and a kind of a nation which is much in a much better position, we should not have done this. We should not have taken this step of supporting Madeshis. And this economic blockade which I'm talking about happened in 2014. Okay, this protest has led to the economic blockade, which should not be supported by India, but unfortunately India supported it. So it actually made our relations again sour with Nepal. But I would like to say that our relation with Bangladesh has improved a lot. Okay, we will talk about Bangladesh separately as well. All of the politics in Sheikh Hasina is their president in the prime minister position right now. Not in the prime minister, she is a chief of council there, and she was not directly in the power, but the person who is in power, who is the prime minister, is actually is a kind of a puppet of a prime minister, as to say. And it is Sheikh Hasina who would do all the politics and would handle everything, every affairs of the country. So it was all on the decisions which are made by Sheikh Hasina, on which the country basically works. So Sheikh Hasina, when there was a war, when there was a at the time of partition of East and West Pakistan, okay, when Bangladesh gained independence, and there were certain military coups also, and those military coups in Bangladesh has in that military coup, his father Sheikh Abdullah was killed, and their family members were killed. Only she was the daughter of Sheikh Abdullah, who had the major contribution in creation of Bangladesh. Okay, so after partition, when military coup happened, okay, Sheikh Abdullah and his family was killed, and only the people left were his daughter Sheikh Hasina, and her another sister is left. And now after that, the Sheikh Hasina has taken, Sheikh Hasina was in India. India gave exile to her, and India actually, at the time of Indira Gandhi, a proper care was taken of Sheikh Hasina, and she was always obliged to India, and she was always grateful for that. And that has of course impacted, now she is in power, so our relations with Bangladesh are of course going to be good. Okay, so we have a good relations with Bangladesh. With Bhutan we have a kind of a neutral relationship. There is nothing to be worried about. With Nepal it has deteriorated, and in Sri Lanka our relation has again deteriorated. Why? Because after, before it was we had a good relation, but after Rajpakshas came into power in Sri Lanka, they were not the supporter of India, and they were not very okay with India, and there are also some internal wars between Indian Tamils, Sinhalese, and their other communities which goes on. So in that case also, the Rajpakshas, who were Sinhalese, and they are not very good, they are not very supportive of India, so we don't have such good relations with Sri Lanka as well. Okay, now because of this problem of having bad relations with our neighboring countries, China has always taken advantage of it, and China has always come up and always tried to actually have better relation with the countries which we have bad relations with, in order to create his influence better. Okay, so China has always taken advantage of such situations, and as a result, Maldives, China has had a good hold on Maldives now as compared to India, so this is also a cause of worry. So of course, if I say like the overall analysis of Gujarat Doctrine, So it was initially very successful, and the philosophy behind it was very great, and it helped change our foreign policy a lot. Our relations has been improved a lot, but in the long run, after a period of time, there was not much advancement with the Gujral doctrine, and it has not managed to get the desired result in the long run. So we can say that, yeah, it was a good policy, but now there is a stagnation that is being seen. Okay, so this was all about Gujral doctrine, and we have discussed. You can include all these points, and you can write your notes related to all these points, and you can include them in your answer writing as well. Okay, so now we are going to talk about a very evergreen topic which could be asked any time in your exam. It is not, it is a kind of an evergreen topic where any time it could come basically. Okay, so we are going to discuss about this topic. So I would like you all to write it in your notebook that you have to do this topic. Okay, and this is non-alignment movement or non-aligned movement, NAM. Okay, so we are going to discuss about this in detail. So as I have already discussed in my previous videos about our basic objectives and principles of foreign policy, where we discussed the outlines of what was given by Nehru on All India Radio, and there was a important principle that was non-alignment with any of the power blocks. Okay, and this is the non-alignment movement which we are talking about. In summary, non-alignment movement is basically, it is an idea where we should not side or get aligned with any kind of power block. Okay, and we should have our own sovereignty in making decisions, and we should have our own independence. This was the basic idea behind NAM, non-aligned movement. Okay, so now I'm going to use NAM in my talk. Okay, so you should know that I'm talking about non-aligned movement. So non-aligned movement was basically first time discussed in Bandung conference, Bandung, Bandung, which is in Indonesia. So it was first discussed in Bandung, and it is an Afro-Asian summit with 29 countries participation, and this particular summit was initiated by Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay, and it was to discuss post-colonial Asia and Africa. Okay, Afro-Asian. So post-colonial Africa, Asia was discussed, and also to talk about China, about the kind of practices that were happening in China. Okay, so all that was discussed. The idea of non-aligned movement, this particular principle as a movement, it came in the Bandung conference only. Okay, and Cold War era was going on, and we don't want to join USSR or USA. Okay, and we should have our independence, and all these ideas were discussed in the Bandung conference, because there was a lots and lots of pressure from both of they emerged as the superpowers at that point of time, and there was a pressure for the countries to align with any of the power blockade, and all of the allies of a particular power block would also be seen as the enemy of the other power block. So there was a kind of a partition that was being asked, and there was a lots and lots of pressure on the countries to join them. So this Bandung conference there has been a very, very strong step of 29 countries, which was again the primary original idea was given by Nehru. So it was a very, very strong stand by Nehru at that point of time to protect the sovereignty and independence of India. So non-aligned movement, okay, this as a movement, it came up in 1961 in Belgrade, Belgrade, Belgrade in Yugoslavia. So now let us talk about the basic philosophy behind NAM. So it was to represent the aspiration and interest of the developing countries. Okay, we had our own concerns, and we had our own aspirations, and all we have our own interests. So it was a kind of a move to stand up, not against someone, but to have our own independent charge. Okay, and we had 120 members till now. If we talk about, we still have 120 members, but China is not there. Okay, but China is there as an observer, not a member. Okay. Now NAM was to support national self-determination, okay, against all form of colonialism or imperialism. The principles that we talked about in our foreign policy, Nehru talked about, okay, and we were highly against both in any kind of imperialism or colonialism to be practiced. So we were against this as well, and that was our view. So in NAM, it was clarified at that point of time only that NAM is not something pacific or not something passive or neutral. Okay, it is not a passive move that we are having, but it is a kind of a proactive move. It is a kind of a proactive foreign policy element. Okay, we are actually engaging with countries, okay, with whom our relationships are not even good, so we are having engagement with them. We are having equal engagement with both of the power blockades, and we are not there to be siding with any of them, but either we are trying to have our own independence. So initial leaders, those who are termed as the architect of NAM, includes, of course, Jawaharlal Nehru is there from India. From Yugoslavia, Joseph Tito was the one. From Egyptian PM Abdel Nasser, ABDELNASSER, Abdel Nasser was there. Then we have General Sukarno from Indonesia, and Kwame Nkrumah, KWAME, Kwame Nkrumah, KRUMAH, from Ghana. So these five were the leaders. I'm going to repeat the name again. First is Jawaharlal Nehru, then we have Joseph Tito, then we have General Sukarno, okay, then we have Abdel Nasser, and then we have Kwame Nkrumah. So these five were the leaders who were considered as the architecture of NAM, non-aligned movement. Okay, so India in 1983, it hosted 7th summit in New Delhi, 7th non-alignment summit in New Delhi. Okay, 120 countries are there in NAM. It is the largest grouping outside UN. Okay, if we are talking about the UN, so that is the largest grouping, United Nations. But apart from UN, another largest grouping is of NAM. Okay, so now the latest summit, if I'm going to talk about, is the 18th summit, which was held in Baku, Azerbaijan. In Baku. The 18th summit has happened recently in October 2019. So, but I would like to talk you about our current stand on NAM. After there has been, when there was a time of Congress, we were the leader, we were actually leading NAM. We were also considered as one of the architect of NAM, but now our stand to NAM is not positive. Okay, we are going to talk about that also, but before that I would like to talk about all the summits that have happened till now. The 17th, I have talked about 18th summit right now in Baku, Azerbaijan. Then in the 17th summit was in Venezuela in 2016. Okay, so there is a gap of 3 here. In 18th summit was in 2019, then the 17th summit was in 2016. Okay, then we have the 16th summit 3 years prior, which was in Tehran in 2013. Then we have the 15th summit, which was in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, which was in 2009. Okay, 2009. And the 14th summit was in Cuba, Havana in 26. Okay, so this was the basic summits that have happened. Okay, I have given you some of them. Where did that happen, in which year they happened. So now let us talk about, in 1983, India was a host of NAM. Okay, there was no formal constitution or no permanent secretariat of NAM, so that posed a problem. So when the next summit, which was the 8th summit after 1983, happened in Harare, Zimbabwe in 1986, 8th summit happened. Okay, so we discussed about having a permanent kind of constitution of secretariat there. But after 1991, when there was a collapse of Soviet Union, the idea of keeping away with the bloc politics has actually changed, and there is no alignment. Basically now there is only one power bloc left, that is USSR has collapsed. So of course the idea, the basic meaning behind the alignment has been disturbed. So it was a makeover in this policy when there was only one bloc left. Okay, now still we had a kind of a association, so we could have talked about the, nowadays we have neo-colonialism, so it could be even a kind of a platform where the neo-colonialism could be avoided, and we should seek even not to align with certain things. Okay, so but now, okay, I was talking about the stand currently. So in the current stand after 2014, after the BJP government, okay, we were not very active in NAM. Okay, Prime Minister himself didn't attended NAM as compared to earlier when we were the architect and we were having like lots and lots of we are lots and lots of enthusiastic about being a part of NAM and having the conferences and all, and being together. But after 2014, this particular our activism there was not very good, and instead of himself, in 2016 and 2019, instead of PM going himself, he actually sent the actually vice president participated there. Okay, so there was an aversion, of course, in current center towards the Nehruvian policies and Nehruvian legacy, of course. So this particular incident, it actually, it indicated that our movement is kind of getting away, we are just getting away from NAM. Okay, so now let us discuss about the limitations of NAM. We have discussed about all the advantages, the basic philosophy behind it, and basic summits that happened, and what was it all about. We have discussed everything. Now let us discuss about the NAM limitations. Okay, so as you can observe that all the countries which were part of NAM were already in the form of developing countries, okay, or not yet developed in the developing countries or least developed countries or something like that. Okay, so all the countries are kind of poor nations and in the kind of a developing stages. So economically we were not very strong, the NAM was not very strong economically. Okay, and there was not a permanent secretariat and a permanent constitution in NAM. Okay, and after the collapse of Soviet Union, the power bloc politics has ended, therefore the relevance has been is over. Basic idea on which the NAM was built was basically over. Okay, according to critics' point of view, of course, this was the limitation of NAM. But we can say that, yeah, critics are saying this, but still we can have NAM. There are many of the things that we should not align with. Okay, and if we are talking idealistically, I'm speaking idealistically here, but if we see the realistic perspectives, so that changes. But ideally speaking, NAM is still relevant and can be practiced today as well. It is very different, it is very difficult to implement the decisions of NAM due to the absence of any kind of binding or executive powers like constitution. It was not there, so there was a difference, there was a very difficulty in passing any kind of particular provision or something. So countries like India, Brazil, China, South Africa, Saudi, they have grown economically so big. Okay, so we have actually in order to get more, we have got industrialized. Okay, and we are like a group of industrialized countries, and we are more keen to deal with the emerging colonies rather than NAM, of course. Okay, so the progress has been the progress of ignoring, we have been having a process of ignoring the role of NAM. Now, because of all the reasons that I stated above, the relevance of NAM has got undermined, and now even India is not keen in NAM, as I've cited earlier in like the 2019 and 2016. PM has not himself participated, and there has been a contradiction in politics because of our internal contradiction in politics. India has not been able to highlight NAM basically. Okay, so let us talk about how we can revitalize NAM. Okay, how we can practice NAM and revitalize this, because this could actually be a big advantage for all the developing countries. Now let us talk about the basic realms where if we revitalize NAM, so it would be very helpful for us. Okay, so NAM basically talks about the independence in foreign policy. That was the basic idea, and it is committed to peace, universal peace and freedom. Now global peace has been threatened by bipolar politics, but even though bipolar politics are not there right now, okay, earlier it was the Cold War era, there were bipolar politics were there, but now even if they are not there, UN is not very effective. Okay, UN is not very effective in maintaining peace and all. So NAM can be very effective here. Okay, and since all the problems of the world, you can say that all the other countries have developed, but most of the problems of the world are in NAM countries itself, the developing countries. So NAM should take active interest in basically resolving these conflicts, and it could become basically a platform, as we see in UN, where we could discuss our conflicts. So all the problems that are arising could be peacefully discussed at that platform. So it could prove to be a good platform. Also, we are not yet threatened by the third world war, but of course always there are dangers are always there. Okay, so we could effectively manage that through NAM. Also terrorism, things like terrorism, drug trafficking, money launderings, illegal arms and trades, environmental issues, etc. Okay, this global pandemic that we suffered, all the developed countries was disappointed by the world. Okay, there was not basic support from UN or US superpowers, and there was lots and lots of a kind of losses for the country, for the developing countries, and developed countries disappointed us all. So NAM could be an effective step to pressurize or to put pressure upon the superpowers to help the other developing countries. Okay, so NAM could also take initiatives about South cooperation. Okay, South here means, we divide the world into North and South, where in the northern part of the world there are usually, there are all the developed countries that are lying there, and in the southern parts there are developing countries. Okay, so we could have a South cooperation which could help us in our economic development as well. Okay, NAM can be used as a forum to promote democracy, human rights across the world, and liberal and tolerant societies, of course. Okay, so this is all about how we can revitalize NAM and how it is relevant in today's time as well, if we are going to follow it adherently, and that is it. Okay, so it was all about NAM. So let me see how long we have taken. It has been 33 minutes yet, so we can talk about other topics as well. Now let us take one more topic, that is ASEAN and Look East policy. This is very important topic. Okay, and this is usually an important topic and you should know about it. So now let us talk about Look East policy. Okay, so Look East policy was basically initiated in 1991 by then PM PV Narasimha Rao. Okay, and it was to improve our relation with the other Southeast Asian countries. The context of the Look East policy was that after the collapse of Soviet Union, the world has become unipolar, and India has been in the deep economic crisis at that point of time. So liberalization and foreign direct investment, it opened our economy. Okay, so from here India became more inclined toward capitalism, and East Southeast Asian countries were also very inclined towards capitalism. So there was this idea that we should have a look east policy, where India should look towards the eastern parts of the world for having better FDI and investments and all, okay, and more liberalization in capitalism. So why only east? So when you look at this thing between US and USSR, so USSR was eastern and US was western. So although we said that we are practicing during the initial time, Nehru preached about non-aligned and all, but during Indira Gandhi's time we've signed certain friendship treaties as well, okay, with the USSR. So it basically showed our inclinedness towards USSR. So that's why we were looking forward to more developments through the eastern country, okay, eastern countries. Yeah, sorry for. Okay, so now during the freedom struggle time in the Southeast Asian countries, they had major influences in like Indonesia under Dutch, and Myanmar, Malaysia, Singapore under British, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam for French, and Philippines and Spain in US, okay. So only Thailand was not colonialized. So we had many kind of similarities with Southeast Asian countries. India has been also been under the colonial rule and had also had freedom struggles, okay, and in Cold War era also India was not close to them, okay, due to differences in ideology. But after the Cold War era, there was a complete change in the dynamics, and this ideological barrier ended in the unipolar world, okay, after the Soviet Union collapse. Now India's looks to east for the investment, and Southeast countries to west, as Southeast it was like highly influenced by China. So Southeast was looking towards the alternatives to reduce the influence of China. So Southeast were like, if you look through the map and through the directions, so Southeast Asian countries towards the west is China, okay, and China is trying to have this economic influence everywhere. So in order to reduce that, they were also looking for some Southeast Asian countries. So India was highly into consideration. So it was a like two-way affair. India also needs SEA, and SEA, Southeast Asian countries, also needs India. So it was a two-way affair. So we were looking for Southeast Asian countries for FDI, foreign direct investment. So a synergy was there, okay, which led ultimately to the success of Look East policy, okay. So there was a great economic success, of course, in the Southeast Asia, and we were looking for more opportunities there. So as Southeast Asia also invested in the infrastructure, roads, ports, banking, insurance, etc., and India was looking for advancement in these areas. So that's why India was also needing Southeast Asia. So and SEA, we had they had surplus basically, and they were looking for certain foreign direct investments that they could do. And India was having a kind of a globalization wave going on at that point of time, so everything coincided well. And Southeast Asia was also looking eagerly forward for FDIs in India, okay. And you can see the enthusiasm by the fact that the Singapore Prime Minister Gochek Tong, he talked about the India fever in SEA, so in early 1990s. So you can see the enthusiasm there. But unfortunately, this India fever didn't lasted longer, and our bureaucracy was not ready for these kind of foreign direct investment, because there was a major issue related to the infrastructure in India, okay, and the labor and all. So we didn't had that kind of technologies to handle all the kind of investments that could take place in India, okay. So there were these you can say procedural infrastructure bottlenecks that was there in India. Okay, so during the second half of Loki's policy, so to say, the excitement completely subsided. There was a bottleneck of procedural infrastructure. Okay, and the government was not stable. In 1996 there was only a 13 days government. Okay, in 1998 only 13 months government. Then 1998 Congress came and it has gained some stability, but we saw like 3 national elections in 4 years, so there was a big lack of stability in the India at that point of time. And there was a Southeast Asian economic crisis also in 1998 to 1999. Okay, where there were certain withdrawals of investments and there was a flight of capital. So there was a foreign investment crisis that were going on. In 2001 PM Vajpayee again revived LEP, and there was no looking back after that. Still we follow this policy, and now again the name has been changed after 2014. We will talk about that also. So now let us first talk about the our relations with Southeast Asian countries. Okay, so there is an organization of Southeast Asian countries which I would like to talk about here, that is known as ASEAN, 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 Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Okay, this is ASEAN, and there are 10 members, and most of the dealings of the Southeast Asian countries were through ASEAN. In 1992, India became the sectoral dialogue partner of ASEAN. Okay, so there were already initially 10 countries. Now India also became the sectoral dialogue partner. So now it has become 10 plus 1, that is ASEAN plus 1. ASEAN plus 1 is what is known as 10 members of ASEAN plus India. Okay, so ASEAN plus 1 was there, and we were invited for dialogues for better cooperation and all. In 1996, India was elevated from sectoral dialogue partner to the full dialogue partner in 1946. Okay, so in 1996. So this was there. In 2002, India ASEAN summit meetings started. Okay, ASEAN plus 1 meeting started with all the PMs of Asian countries, including the PM of India. In 2003, we started the negotiations for FTA, that is the free trade agreements with ASEAN. Okay, so there were continuous dialogues that were going on, and finally in 2009 India ASEAN free trade agreement was signed. Okay, and it came into force in 2010. Now in 2012 there was a commemorative summit. Okay, and it took place in Delhi, commemorative summit of ASEAN plus 1, and both India and ASEAN signed a certain strategic partnerships together. By 2014, the free trade agreement in the services came into force. Okay, and from 2018, 25 years of sectoral dialogue plus a commemorative summit was also practiced. It was also celebrated. Then there is also a concept of ASEAN plus 3, where there are 3 other countries including the 10 members, and the 3 other countries are China, Japan and South Korea. Okay, so this is the concept of ASEAN plus 3 is also there. So there was a bilateral trade in 2019 to 20, where we have reached to more than $8 billion trade. Okay, but around 30 to 32 billion export was there, and 50 to 60 billion import was there. So of course the import was more than the export, so there was a trade deficit from Indian bilateral trade. So after PM Modi, again after 2014, after NDA came to power, it was renamed as Act East policy. Okay, Act East policy is the another name which we follow right now, and you should all know about it. So it is one of the most successful foreign policy initiative. Okay, now I would like to talk about, before ending this, a bit about what is actually foreign trade. Okay, so it is a pact between two or more countries in order to reduce the barriers in trade. Okay, so there are certain barriers in import and export when we study economy, or if you have a basic idea of economy, so you would be able to understand it. But those who don't know also, just to explain it to you, there are basically barriers in trading between the two or more countries. If two countries or two or more countries are trading with each other, okay, so there are certain like barriers like tariff, TARRIF, quotas are there, subsidies are there, etc. Okay, so there are certain kind of trade barriers. Okay, so they were there. So free trade, in the case of free trade, what happens is that these barriers are removed. Okay, so there are no artificial obstacles in trading, and there should be a free trading between the countries. Okay, so World Trade Organization, WTO, the aim of them is also free trade for world, and it allowed countries to do basically the free trades. So in 2010, free trade agreement of India and ASEAN took place. Okay, but over a period of time, what did India realized is that India is not benefiting anything from benefiting in the same way as the other Asian countries are benefiting from FTA. How? Because we were, what is happening, that India was forced to reduce its import duty, okay, tariff. So we already have a very high tariff around 30, and that was forced to be reduced to 5%. So we have to reduce our tariff already. And in the other South Asian countries, already import duty is not that much, okay, and they were like, if they already had a 5% tariff duty, so they were only forced to reduce it to 3%. But if you see the gap between the earlier and the present import duties, like we used to collect 30%, but after FTA it was only reduced to 5%. So there is a very major gap, and there is a very major trade deficit also. Okay, India is doing less exports as compared to the other East Asian countries, doing more imports to us in a less tariff. So it was not benefiting us. Okay, there was a very, very high reduction in the import duties from India's side. Okay, so this was a factor. Also, the manufacturing factor of India is weak. Okay, we have more of the service sector, but our infrastructure or manufacturing is not that great. Okay, like if you see in the agriculture sector, we have a 16% of you can say contribution, and manufacturing sector is 30%, whereas the service sector is 54%. So you can compare, where service sector is 54% and manufacture and agriculture and all is at 30%. So there is a very, very less manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector of India is weak. Okay, so there was a problem. We were not able to export much, but we have to import things more. Okay, so the Southeast Asian countries were benefiting more as compared to India. Okay, so India decided to come out of this regional comprehensive Eastern Partnership with East Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, and East Asian countries, and as we were having lots and lots of losses. Okay, so India also wanted to have a kind of India actually focused, and they focused more on CEPA, okay, that is Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and we were looking for more of the agreements where there would be more involvement of our stronger sector, that is our service sector, so that we could also gain advantages of the relationship. Like we are looking forward to CEPA, that is Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and we are also looking forward to CECA, like Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. Okay, so we are looking forward to such comprehensive agreements. So in 2017 and 18, I will tell you that we had a like $81 billion trade, and import was around 47 billion and export was around 34 billion. So again a trade deficit was there. In 2020, ये अच्छा, अगर आप लोगों को कन्फ्यूजन हो तो मैं एक बात बता दूं, मैंने आपको जो RCEP बताया था वो एशियन और इंडिया का, मैंने आपको वो नहीं बताया था कि हमने वो छोड़ दिया है। इट वाज एन एग्जाम्पल, क्योंकि वहाँ पर भी हम लोगों को बहुत ज़्यादा डेफिशिएट हो रहा था, मतलब हमारा जो ट्रेड था इट वाज नॉट गोइंग एज व्हाट वाज एक्सपेक्टेड, सो दैट्स व्हाई वी केम आउट ऑफ RCEP, ठीक है। बट ये एक डिफरेंट चीज़ है, वो मैंने बस एक एग्जाम्पल के लिए दिया था, सो डोंट गेट कन्फ्यूज, ओके। सो इंडिया एशियान की अब मैं बात कर रही हूँ फिर से। 2020 में हमारा $86 मिलियन का ट्रेड हुआ था, बिलियन डॉलर का, सॉरी, जिसपे $55 बिलियन वॉज इम्पोर्ट एंड $31 बिलियन वॉज एक्सपोर्ट। सो अगेन देर इज अ ट्रेड डेफिशिएट, ओके। सो मोस्ट ऑफ द ईस्ट एशियन countries are export driven and they have like strong export and manufacturing sector. So but in India we don't have that strong manufacturing sector, so there is a problem of capitalization in India. So these were the certain problems and challenges which was faced. And also the importance of India Asian relations needs to be talked about. What was the importance? So there was an advantage between India and ASEAN, that our economies were kind of complementary to each other and not competitive. So there is not a competition between any of the Southeast Asian countries because we complemented each other. And this also has helped us improve the relation with the Southeast Asian countries, which would ultimately help us to checkmate China, okay. So the trade route towards East Asian countries was also like had become free, and the passes through Europe and Africa has become through Malacca Strait and all has came under the influence of India as well. We could freely navigate to send our like to do the exports and all. And Malacca Strait is from where the major Chinese trade take place, and it is a very very narrow strait. So if India also have its movement there, so we could have a kind of a control over the Chinese, okay. So this is the thing. And also there was a lots and lots of strategic importance, okay. And there was a maritime security that is also involved. Also in Northeast India there is a 1,600-kilometer long boundary with Southeast Asian countries like Myanmar. So a good relation with Myanmar could also reduce the threat as a neighboring country, as a national security issue in India. So it was a very very it was advantageous for India in many ways. So this was all about ASEAN and our Look East policy or Act East policy, the name.